What happens when we stop asking what can we do with AI and start asking why? Well, today I'm joined by the inspirational Kate O'Neill. She's a tech humanist. As regular listeners will know, that's speaking my language because I'm all about the human element when it comes to technology. And as I always say, technology works best when it brings people together. So today we're going to explore how we can make better, wiser decisions about technology in this rapid rate of technological change in everything from agentic AI to purpose-led innovation. Because Kate challenges the default assumptions that are shaping many of today's digital strategies and offers a much more refreshing and practical lens for building tech that serves both business outcomes and human values. I'm really looking forward to this one. So enough from me. Let's get Kate onto the podcast now. So a massive warm welcome to the show. Can you tell everyone listening a little about who you are and what you do?
Thanks for having me. I am Kate O'Neill. I'm known as the tech humanist. My work is all about the intersection of emerging technology and its impact on humanity. And mostly that takes place through business. So we're really thinking about how things like AI are deployed by business and how that ends up affecting people. So my goal is to help businesses make better use of technology so that the business can thrive, but in a way that doesn't harm humanity in the process.
Well, it's a pleasure to have you join me today. One of the big themes of this podcast is every day I say technology works best when it brings people together. So one of the things that I love about your work is that focus on the human element in all things tech. And your latest book, What Matters Next, centers on human-centered decision-making in tech. So I've got to ask, how do you define meaningful progress in an AI-driven business environment and not lose sight of that human element?
Yeah, thanks, Neil. I think so. So there's a couple of things to unpack there. One is that, as I mentioned, I think the focus is around business, right? And how business deploys technology. And that's why this latest book is a focus on decision making, because I think increasingly what leaders seem to be feeling is this distress over how complicated everything is, how fast everything seems to be moving, how complex the decisions are, how downstream consequences seem bigger and more consequential, and so that was what I was trying to address with the book. But it carries with it the legacy of the books I've written before, including A Future So Bright and Tech Humanist and Pixels in Place. And all of those really deal on some level with the same themes, but the underlying theme of each of them is how meaning is the central aspect of the human condition and of human experience. And as long as we're steering toward technology-driven experiences that respect meaning in some way, that have some understanding of what it is to be a human, then I think we're at least approaching the right territory. So that's kind of the direction that this goes, is when we think about, meaningful experiences or, meaningful deployments, what we're really trying to do is recognize that people have a reason why that they're coming online to do something. They're searching for something. They're looking for a service. They're looking for a product. They're trying to solve a problem. They're trying to address some need that they have in the moment. And the more and better businesses address that need and find a way to align what they're trying to do with what people are trying to do and use technology to amplify and accelerate that alignment, as opposed to using the technology to amplify and accelerate merely the business drivers themselves, that's where the business is going to do the most good, is if they focus on that alignment. And then it can benefit both sides of that equation.
Yeah, I echo everything that you just said. And I've been to 10 or 11 tech conferences in the US this year. And the key buzzwords are, yes, AI and agentic AI. But I would say the big phrase that's repeated at every one of those conferences is the importance of keeping the human in the loop. And as organizations right now are racing to adopt AI or bring things out of the pilot phase, I'm curious, where do you see leaders making the biggest missteps in preserving that human experience at scale when they are distracted by the possibilities of this technology?
Yeah, I think it's important to acknowledge that what you're saying there, the human in the loop, right? That's an actual term of art within the AI space, right? Human in the loop refers to, and your listeners may know this, but for those of your listeners who may not, human in the loop refers to that approach to AI-led decision-making where there is still a human reviewing the outcomes of the decision before they go into practice. So, you might have algorithmic, processes reviewing mortgage applications, but before you approve or deny any of those people who have applied for mortgages, you've got somebody reviewing them and saying, yes, we're going to go ahead and approve this. We're not going to approve that. And the benefit of that is, pretty obvious, I think, when you start thinking about it, that there may be situations where an AI hasn't been trained on some of the nuances of what actually matters to us in the real world about, trying to build community, trying to diversify our communities, trying to respect people's ambition to have better lives. Some of those kinds of things. Also, AI may not recognize some of the things like tells of trolls that we may be able to spot, where sometimes somebody may just be goofing around on an application and have put something that to us is very obvious, a sort of joke or practical sort of prank, and an AI might not spot that kind of thing. So there's all kinds of reasons on all ends of the spectrum here why it makes sense to have people involved, and not just in mortgage applications, but in many, many aspects of life, healthcare, law enforcement, criminal justice, many of the things that AI has become more involved in. It's still very, very important that we have people in that process. Now, there are decisions that can be more automated, and that's where agentic AI is coming into play a lot more. So I think from my definition of agentic AI is any AI system that is making at least one decision for you, right? So you're outsourcing some piece of decision making. You're saying there's a step of work that I have to do over here and a step of work that I have to do over here. And as long as you've got a good enough handle on the conditions in which I want you to proceed from this step to that step, then just go ahead and proceed. Don't involve me, just get it done. And I think more and more, the better we get with understanding the true nature of these workflows, we're going to get more comfortable with what kind of tasks can be automated in that way and which kind of tasks we're going to need that human in the loop involvement in. But it is this discourse, this transitional phase where, as you say, like this is a conversation at every conference for very good reason. And that is that this is a very important transitional phase for us to get good at.
And I would say there's one area that doesn't seem to be getting good at that. I would say that is recruitment. And I know companies have, 200 applications for a job role. But if your application is not formatted the way that the algorithm wants to see it, if it doesn't have the right key buzzwords, it's not even going to get in front of a human. So that's something to think about. Are there any other mistakes that you're seeing there or missteps?
Yeah, I think that many, like your example is a great one, and I cite it within What Matters Next. There's the famous example of Amazon using an AI tool for parsing resumes and, that applicant tracking system that notoriously recommended mostly a very homogeneous sort of talent pool, white men of a certain kind of dispensation, of a certain sort of education and so on. And that they tried to correct for that and found that they sort of couldn't, in a way, that the data set that they had used and they had trained the algorithm on was based on high performers within the organization, which, because the organization had disproportionately tended to hire a certain demographic, that sort of white male demographic, it was hard to get the breakaway set to represent anything other than that demographic. So I think this is the kind of thing that we can use as an instructive example. It's not to throw Amazon under the bus per se. They were, making a worthy experiment to try to see whether they could automate this process. And they hire a lot of people on a regular basis. So it stands to reason that that's a process that they would want some sort of machine learning automation to be part of. But they didn't nail it. And so they don't use it except internally now in a very modified way with that human in the loop process. And I think it's a good instructive example for us that says, if we have to, first of all, recognize that data sets matter very, very much. Like, what data our algorithms have been trained on. And this is a point I often make in my keynotes, like today's data set is training tomorrow's algorithm, and today's algorithm is training tomorrow's AI system, and today's AI system is training tomorrow's autonomous deep learning, self-reinforcing engine. Like, it's a very important chain of events that we need to be very clear to understand. And so if we're it's that garbage in, garbage out philosophy, right? If we're putting data sets together that are not representative of the breadth of the kind of results we would like to see or the outcomes we would like to allow, then we're not going to see those outcomes. And it's just not possible for the AI to extrapolate beyond the data set it's given. It will make erroneous decisions. And that's not where we want to delegate such important decisions.
And of course, you've worked with such a wide range of companies, from governments to tech giants, all on that topic of digital transformation. And if we put everything that you've worked on, all those different companies of all sizes, what patterns have you noticed in how these organizations approach complexity and decision making? Any trends there?
Yeah, the best cases, I think, are those where there are good examples of approaching transformation as a process, both a process and a project, right? Transformation, I define this in What Matters Next. I feel like over the 25 years or so that we've been having this conversation about digital transformation, that we've often conflated transformation with innovation. And that isn't true. Like, those things are not the same. They actually happen on different parts of the timeline, in a sense. So one of the models I introduced in What Matters Next is called the Now Next Continuum. It's really just a timeline, showing sort of the evolution from the past to the present to the future. But what happens is that transformation occurs from the past to the present. It's when we're looking at something that's already changed in the landscape around us that we have to catch up with. So, something may have changed, like the market may have shifted, our customer expectations have changed. There's a new modality that we need to adapt to, like, Netflix going from DVDs to streaming. Or there's something like COVID, some sort of black swan externality that means that everybody has to change to catch up with whatever the need is of the moment. Innovation, on the other hand, is looking forward, is standing in the present going like, what could we do that's new, that our competitors haven't thought of yet, that no one is beginning to anticipate, or that maybe starts to build on even just sort of the whiff of what might be coming down the road, right? That's Netflix investing in streaming before it was a thing, right? So you've got examples of this all over the place, but it's really important, I think, to keep those concepts a little bit distinct, and neither one is more important than the other. They need to be happening all the time in every organization. But I think the best organizations have intuitive sort of DNA about this, and they treat those projects as disparate projects. They understand that there's wholesale transformation that always needs to be happening across the organization, and that needs to be cross-functional. It needs to involve a lot of different people. And innovation really needs to be looking ahead in really unlimited ways, and needs to be able to experiment and figure things out and do proof of concept projects that can then be brought back so that they can scale. And that's really exciting to see in organizations like Google and like IBM, and even like, some governments. You can look at governments like Estonia as a really cool example of having experimented with and done very well at digitizing many functions of government. So there's a lot of great examples out there. And then there are some bad ones. And some of the bad ones that are out there are more about where they, not naming names per se, but just saying the focus tends to be on the technology as opposed to being on solving the problems that technology can solve. So, if we get led astray and think like, oh, look, agentic AI, let's figure out what we're going to do with agentic AI, we're probably going to do the wrong thing. Whereas if we, allow a little group to go off and experiment and figure out the boundaries of agentic AI, like what could it do? Let's play around, but at the same time, let's not take our eye off the ball of the operational excellence we're trying to achieve in our organization. Let's make sure we're doing all of the important daily work of transformation, bringing things up to date, bringing things up to speed, fixing the underlying infrastructure, making sure things are sound. And then when there's recommendations of like, here's something a problem we could actually solve in the organization using a tool like agentic AI. Great. Then we can roll that in, but it shouldn't be led by the technology.
100%. I spent some time in Estonia a few years ago.
Yeah.
How the work that they've done there in digitising every government service. At the time, I think it was 99%, and that 1%, the only thing you couldn't do was get divorced. And I think they were working on that. So that was the only thing that was left. But I mean, outside, like you mentioned agentic AI there. One of the things that makes me nervous is so many businesses are putting swarms and swarms of these agentic AI agents out there, moving fast, breaking things without thinking who's accountable and what could happen in the future. But does that kind of stuff keep you awake at night? Or
Yeah, it does. And I think, it's why I am so driven with the work that I do. But I think it's also, I don't know, I think it's inevitable that people are going to make missteps and mistakes. And I think, unfortunately, it's going to cost people. It's going to, people are going to hurt and suffer in various ways because of it. And that's just a fact. And it's unfortunate. And I think just the importance of the work I feel I'm trying to do, and the importance of sounds like the work you're trying to do, and many people out there trying to educate people, is really trying to help minimize that. Try to connect the dots so that communication happens better, ideas are thought about better, decisions are made better. But I think, we also have to recognize that there are going to be harms, and realistically, there are going to be risks out there. Things are going to go wrong. And so I think that this is a project that involves a lot of different facets of society to make sure, we've got good systems in place for upskilling and reskilling, for example. That's one of the things that we've been talking about for years and years, but that takes on new urgency when we think about the rash ways that managers and leaders are, capping out newsrooms and offices and saying, oh, well, now we can do this with, ChatGPT or an agentic AI implementation. So we don't need half of the headcount in this room. And that rash decision, first of all, oftentimes boomerangs, and the managers and leaders end up hiring back many of the people that they let go, which doesn't seem like it lends itself to a high morale environment to work in. But also, like, you've lost a lot of culture, you've lost a lot of institutional knowledge along the way, you've lost a lot of the opportunity to have teams that are rowing in the same direction and trying to achieve big outcomes, meaningful outcomes. And along the way, the people that you have cut now have to figure out what they're going to do next. And that reskilling and upskilling discussion becomes relevant again in urgent ways. And so I see some really incredible opportunities out there where states in the US and other entities across the world are putting together cool programs, some of them public-private partnerships, some of them, state-funded, some of them private. I think there's any number of mechanisms by which we can be educating people and affording them opportunities to sort of reinvent themselves and look for new ways to plug into the opportunities that exist out there.
And if we look at the IT belts and braces mantra to any IT project, has always been you can only improve what you measure. And the measuring of success has always been through efficiency metrics. That's long dominated most digital initiatives. But I'm curious, are there any alternative measures that you think will offer a more accurate picture of impact? Because there seems to be so much more that we could be measuring.
Yeah, I think one of the important things about what you're pointing out there with efficiency metrics is one of the mistakes I think managers and leaders often make is using efficiency metrics on people. Yeah. Like, people aren't supposed to be efficient. Processes can be efficient. People should be good. People should be knowledgeable. People should be, able to ask questions and learn and adapt and things like that. And ultimately, they should be able to contribute to processes that are efficient. But I think we need to, disambiguate between what we're measuring with efficiency. And that's where I think we get ourselves into trouble when we're looking at the managing of work that is done remotely or through hybrid teams. Managers don't necessarily know how to manage when there's not efficiency metrics in the mix. And this has been a complaint that both writers and software developers have lodged for many, many years. Like, you don't want to be measured on words you've written, and you don't want to be measured on lines of code that you've written. Like, that is not the way to measure. It's not the way to measure efficiency, first of all, because you can't be sure that someone was efficient in generating a certain amount of words or lines of code. It's also certainly not the way to measure effectiveness, because there is no guarantee that the words I've written are good words, or that the lines of code I've written are necessarily the most elegant output that I could have created. Every software developer will say that some of the best software solutions are those that are shorter, not longer. So you want to be able to make more elegant choices. But that is not going to be easy to do if you're being measured on these very obvious superficial metrics. And usually those are associated with efficiency. So just to say, I think that, that discussion needs to be one that managers and leaders are sort of taking themselves to task and making sure to educate themselves on how to do better measurement of, a variety of kinds of work that are happening in the workplace, increasingly across both human and automated components of the workforce. So that's going to be increasingly important that we understand how to differentiate there. But I think one of the things that for me is very interesting is that even when you think about a blended workforce that involves AI contributing to the mix, and you think about human collaborators with AI, I think one of the things that still is very relevant is to think about, have we been very clear about what our strategic organizational purpose is? Have we articulated what it is we're trying to do in as succinct a way as possible, so that it is clear for human contributors and collaborators to know what bigger thing they're contributing to, because that's where we're going to contribute value for some time to come, is that very esoteric understanding of how meaning comes into the mix. How do we make nuanced decisions? How do we make good judgment calls? How do we bring contextual awareness and emotional intelligence and that kind of social sophistication to these decisions and processes? Whereas a strategic organizational purpose, that clear, distinct, distilled articulation, also benefits machines and AI contributors in that they have a very good operating set or instruction to work from, like what it is they're trying to contribute to as well. So I think that's a really useful thing, no matter how sophisticated AI gets, no matter how involved or sort of collaborative our work environments become, the value humans bring is still going to be in that esoteric, value-added, purpose-driven, meaningful sense. And purpose is that link between where humans contribute and where machines contribute. So that's the measure, I would say, like it really bringing those meaningful metrics to bear. And I know that sounds a little vague and hard to grasp, but it's a really important thing to just kind of sit with and really make sure that, you're taking back that challenge to articulate what it is you're trying to do in as simple and clear a distillation as possible, and that everybody knows it and can say it.
And when I was looking at your work before you came on the podcast today, one of the things that really stood out was ethical acceleration being an area that you're incredibly passionate about. So for any leaders listening, any advice on how they should be moving quickly with emerging tech while also maintaining accountability, equity, transparency? Because I know this is a big area that you're passionate about.
Yeah. I think one of the things that comes up a lot in What Matters Next, and it's come up in my work for years, is that there is an incredible need. Obviously, there's a need everyone feels for making decisions quickly. But I think there's also a need for making those decisions, and I think it's not a very controversial thing to say, more wisely too. Mm-hmm. And so what I advocate for is the use of tools like insights and foresights to build that vocabulary for ourselves, to build sort of a repertoire of what we do know and what we know sort of timelessly about the decisions that we can make in our environment. What do we understand about why people are drawn to our solutions as opposed to our competitors? What do we understand about what that alignment I referred to earlier is, between what the company is trying to do or the organization is trying to do and what people outside of the organization are trying to do. And in using those articulations, like I talked about the purpose articulation a moment ago, using that kind of clarity. I'll give you one example would be something like with Apple. It's very well understood that Apple has long been a brand that thrives on an understanding of the aesthetics that people appreciate about it, right? There's a trade-off that people appreciate where they may not have as full an access to the underpinnings of the technology as someone who, gets into Linux, let's say. But they have an appreciation that everything just kind of works, or it traditionally has. There's this sense that things are well designed. There's a packaging that goes with the whole process. And so that's an insight about Apple that allows Apple executives to make more rapid decisions about what's a priority. If you're given a choice, well, we know we need to prioritize aesthetics. We know we need to prioritize design and the experience, the packaging, that sort of thing. It's going to be easier to make certain decisions because you know that insight, because you can carry that insight with you. So in that sense, I think every organization really benefits, every leader really benefits by sort of taking inventory of the things they just know and they don't know they know, right? That just really taking a sense of what could I make decisions about rapidly? And what would give me that high integrity between what it is I say we're trying to do and what I could do efficiently, what I could do with a great ease. If someone brought me a decision, should we acquire this company or not? I can make that decision rapidly because I know whether it derives naturally from what I can already say about what I know about our company. That's, I think, work that unfortunately we don't spend enough time doing. And so, it's a permission I think leaders need to give themselves to allow a certain amount of time in a particular rhythm, a cadence that works for them, whether it's weekly or quarterly, whatever it is, to really revisit those insights and refamiliarize themselves with that. It brings to this level of technology decision-making, the AI decision-making, this ability to be urgent, to respond with urgency to opportunities to deploy things like agentic AI or other kinds of emerging technology. If there's your team is bringing you opportunities to invest in new technologies that can speed you up on certain kinds of initiatives, you are going to be able to understand much better, or at least know the questions to ask about those technologies, because you're going to be coming from a much wiser place with that. And that's really where that ethical acceleration comes from, is drawing on that human wisdom, even in this increasingly accelerating environment we're operating in.
And I also see that you've spoken about designing AI-led interactions with empathy, and you mentioned foresight a moment ago. So what does all that look like in practice? And are there any industries that you're seeing that are getting it right?
Yeah, in practice with that, one of the things that looks like, and I'll just re-reference this, which is talking about insights and foresight. One of the things I love the most in the What Matters Next work is this concept of bankable foresights. I talk about the idea that as you go through this process of of asking questions, gathering partial answers, figuring them out into insights, and this is all explained in the book. But then you kind of gather what's happening in your externalities, what are the trends, what's the context, and so on. Then you can make timely decisions and approaches for now. But then what also happens is that you get a glimpse of what might matter in the future. And you start to be able to accumulate this bank of wisdom that sort of directs you into what is likely to be your future trajectory. What you're likely to have to make decisions about in the coming months, years, etc., even decades. That sort of foresight comes with this territory. And what I see happening is that in many organizations that are they're moving in a reactive way, they're not getting a chance to build that store of foresight. And so they're having to find themselves, whipping around sort of constantly in a spin, because they're always going like, oh, okay, now there's agentic AI. Now we have to figure out how to layer that in onto everything, into our architecture. And they haven't they're not operating from a place of, well, what we know is this regulation that's coming in 5 years. We need to be ready for that. So what we need to be doing is thinking about how we could be building a more sustainable practice here. And, it looks like agentic AI could actually help us pull this data set together and inform us on a weekly basis of how closely we're meeting that sustainability imperative. But then we'll be ready by the time that regulation comes into place. Those kinds of things, I think those decisions, it's hard to point to an industry that's doing that well, but there are players in every industry, I think, that are across that spectrum, that are being very reactive and not taking opportunity to use foresight and empathy and ethical acceleration, and those that are. And I think you can see those just by paying attention to the news every day and see which organizations seem to be coming out with things that seem prescient and like they're ahead of the game. Those organizations are using foresight.
And if we look elsewhere, there's also an increasing pressure on leaders to create meaningful employee experiences, especially during any transformation efforts. Again, I'm not sure if you've seen this, but are there any frameworks that you recommend for balancing tech change with cultural resilience? Because I think very often we talk too much about the technology, but it's the cultural resilience and how open that workforce culture is that will make that technology a success. But anything you're seeing here?
Yeah. This is actually an area that I've been talking a lot about in media and with executives that have been advisory clients. One example that I've seen recently that we've all probably seen recently. I'm a fan of this app, Duolingo. You probably know the company, right? I'm a big language nerd. I love learning languages. So I'm in Duolingo multiple times a day working on my languages. And so it was really interesting and disappointing, recently in the last few weeks when CEO Luis van Aan was announcing that they were transforming to be an AI first company. And that was the announcement in those words, AI first. But he was, I would say, unfortunately, very unclear about what that would mean for employees, for the larger teams that work on the product, what it would mean for customers, what it meant in the larger span of history, like what was the context of this. And he learned, I think, the hard way that people needed answers on that kind of thing. People needed to know what it meant for them as contributors. So there was the employee perception, and then there was the contractor perception. So Duolingo uses a lot of contractors in their work, which many companies do. But those contractors, it appears, were to be cut out of the mix. And I don't think that people responded very well to that. I don't think that customers took the message very well. A lot of people announced very loudly on social media that they were dropping their Duolingo subscription. And it was just a very sort of chaotic moment in which I think Van Aan probably learned pretty quickly that he could have been a lot clearer up front about what the intent was. And he came back and he'd sort of massaged the message and made sure to say, what we mean is, there's going to be more of an emphasis on using AI for better learning opportunities and this sort of thing. And we're going to be doubling down on our core skills and our core employees and so on. Those things would have been very helpful to say up front. And I think it's a great takeaway for any leader who finds themselves in the position of needing to explain a transformative technology decision. People, I think it's pretty understandable that people feel a good deal of anxiety around these kinds of announcements. Like there's always a sense that people have like an axe is coming and that they're going to fall under that axe. And so people want to know, how does this affect me? And I think one of the great takeaways from the Duolingo fracas is that there could have been an opportunity to come up right up front and say, we're going to do everything possible to preserve the human contribution to this team. But what we think is likely to happen is that we're going to be able to serve customers better, enable better learning. Really focus on the features and the benefits. Like, what are we trying to accomplish here? And then people will know, they get an opportunity to say, like, I can align with that. I can be part of that vision. I can make myself indispensable in a mission that's trying to provide better education. And not every job is going to be preserved. And, that is an unfortunate aspect of the economic conditions we're going to be facing for years to come. We're going to have to deal with how that plays out. But I think that every individual leader who's finds themselves in the role of needing to announce these kinds of changes needs to do so with empathy and needs to do so with clarity and needs to understand that people are going to feel existential dread at that moment and deal with it in a way that's proactive and clear and gets ahead of that moment. Otherwise, you're going to find yourself the butt of jokes and trolling and anger on social media. It's not anywhere any CEO wants to find themselves.
So true. And I am hopeful that most businesses will understand that the real value is human and machines working together rather than just replacing people with tech. So if we think about that future where human and machine collaboration, that is where the magic happens. What questions should leaders be asking before they even begin implementing AI or any emerging technologies into their everyday processes, would you say?
I'm going to say the first question is that one I alluded to earlier. Start with purpose. Make sure before you even start thinking about where you're bringing AI into the mix, that you can articulate what your strategic organizational purpose is. And by that, I mean a 3 to 5 word articulation, no more, right? It should not be something that's this paragraph of cloudy, obfuscated language that, this like the mission statement or vision statement of too many companies that we strive to be the best at blah, 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 right? That's nothing anybody can repeat. But an example that I love is the Disney theme parks create magical experiences. And it's very crisp and clear. And it's very easy to imagine how someone from working in a call center to working as a janitor on Main Street in a theme park can find themselves part of a solution that creates magical experiences for visitors to those theme parks. It also sets up the opportunity to make a multi-billion-dollar investment in the My Magic Band wearables program that allows people to be able to move throughout the park with payment information and personalized information right there in the wearable that they have on their wrist. So those kinds of decisions become very unified and very holistic across the organization, whether it's tech deployment or company or employee morale or whatever it might be, with that clarity that comes from the articulation of that purpose. And then I would say the other question about implementing AI into everyday processes is not can we do this, but should we? And if so, how should we? And the how is really important. How we implement AI should come at that alignment level. It should be about how do we think about what it is we're trying to accomplish, that strategic organizational purpose, and what we're trying to do at scale, and what people are trying to do who are interacting with our business or organization. Where is that alignment, and how can we use technology, how can we use AI to better serve that alignment? And it doesn't have to be direct. Sometimes AI is going to be implemented very much behind the scenes in sort of a procurement role or, something operational that no one outside of the organization is ever going to see or feel directly. But as long as it's in service of the company operating better in service of that alignment, as long as the company is able to benefit in a way that serves that purpose, then you're doing the right thing. But I think those questions really start with purpose, and then they get to that, not can we, but should we? And if so, how should we?
Fantastic advice. And thank you so much for taking the time to sit down with me today and share your invaluable insights. But before I let you go, I'm going to ask you to leave one final gift for everyone listening. We have a bit of fun with you now. We have a Spotify playlist. That's my guest to leave a song on there that means something to them or they just recommend. It could be anything. Guilty pleasures are allowed. But what would you like to add to that list and why?
Well, it seems only fitting. I think my walk-on music at most keynote events is Human by the Killers. So I feel like that's going to have to be the contribution that I make to the list.
Do you know what my follow-up question was going to be? I know you're a big public speaker, so what is your walk-on song? So I'm glad you got...
It's funny. So it's that, or it's sometimes it'll be like someone will use "She Blinded Me with Science" or "A Future So Bright." The future so bright, I gotta wear shades, by Tim Buck-3, because of the title of my last book, "A Future So Bright." But I also found that one time I mentioned to an organizer that I was a big fan of Beyonce, and so I got Crazy Right Now, or is it Crazy in Love, by Beyonce as my walk-on music. And I learned because of that, I would never have asked for it because it seems like way too like glamorous and ostentatious for me. But I learned that you cannot not strut when Beyonce music is playing. And so I was like, well, actually, there might be something to this. Maybe I should be using this song.
I was going to say, how could you walk on stage without doing a little Beyonce? Strut there, yeah. It's just no way you couldn't. Well, I will get Human added to our Spotify playlist. Now, obviously, we've talked about your work, your writing, and indeed public speaking. There's a lot you do out there. Where can people find out more information and connect with you and find out more information?
Yeah, my website it's my business website. It's koinsights.com, koinsights.com. And I spend a lot of time, I used to direct people to Twitter, but unfortunately it isn't the same it used to be. But I spend a lot of time on LinkedIn, and that's just Kate O'Neill, Kateoneill. You can find me there. You can find me, I think there's a lot of links on KO Insights to everywhere I spend time online, but I welcome input from folks. I'd love to hear what resonated with you, what questions you have, from what we talked about, what ideas you'd share, what examples you think of. I'd love to hear from folks. So please do reach out.
Yeah, I'll add links to everything so people can find you nice and easily. And I do urge everyone listening as well to check out your book, What Matters Next, where you explore the critical intersection of technology and humanity and focus on how leaders can make human-centered tech decisions in this rapidly evolving world, man. It's a great read. I would urge people to check that out. And it's words that we need to hear right now as well. So important. But thank you for sharing your story today.
Thank you, Neil. It was a lot of fun. Thank you for having me.
So as leaders race to implement emerging tech, I think Kate reminded us today that speed means nothing without direction. And purpose isn't just a mission statement. But as this is a topic that impacts each and every one of us, I'd love to know what you think. Can organisations keep pace with change while remembering to stay grounded in empathy and meaning? Let me know your thoughts wherever you're listening in the world. I'd love to hear your perspective. Tech blog writer at outlook.com, LinkedIn, X, Instagram, just at Neil C. Hughes. Let me know and I will get straight back to you. If you want to come on the show, let me know. Other than that, I'll be back again tomorrow morning with another guest and a completely different topic to mull over. And hopefully I'll speak with you all then. Bye for now.